All right, I want to keep us moving along. This next panel is truly amazing. If you were here last year, you got to see this, and it's unbelievable the ability to have this level of experience and expertise all together at once. So we can have the next panel come up while I'm talking, but we've got current and past secretaries, directors of finance. We've got the very first secretary of the Government Operations Agency. We've got the current secretary of Government Operations Agency. Got my former boss, former secretary of CalHHS, former cabinet secretary. Please join me in welcoming former Secretary Batjer, Secretary Tong, former Secretary Wilkening, and former cabinet secretary Bosler.
I know, a bunch of secretaries. I think Amy's supposed to sit there. All right, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the stage again and to see all of you. And man, I'm energized after what I just heard about Envision 2026. It is an exciting time, and many of us here on the stage that are not part of government anymore are here because we care so deeply about everything that Leanna just laid out, and we want to see it succeed. We are here to talk a little bit about the past, but we also want to talk about the future, and we want Amy to have an opportunity here to start us off to just talk a little bit about the last several years as GovOps Secretary and all of the new initiatives that you have taken on.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back. And I guess we did okay last year. That's why we get the invitation. But kidding aside, I was, again, thrilled to hear Director Bailey Crimmins, this, just energizing opening about the Envision 2026. And I think, Keely, to your question, the future would not be possible without a solid foundation that was built from the past. And that's why I'm also, personally just privileged to be amongst this panel. I called on my boss, and my boss. And this is like, once your boss, they're always your boss. So the future, as you heard many, director have shared, that technology innovation is really at the center of what government transformation it's all about. And especially now with all of the budget challenge and the various changes that is coming, we have to continue to center what is most important, which is look for any enablers or tools or things that can help you as from a state entity aspect to deliver what we are charged to deliver, which is a improved customer service to our residents. And we talked about operation efficiency, we talked about transformation, we talked about innovation. Sometimes you hear those words, it may be just like buzzword, but how do you implement with the degree of intentionality, with the degree of purpose, and with the degrees that, hey, we need to talk to our residents on a regular basis, which I can elaborate a little bit on and some of the future initiatives we're looking at. So that constant feedback loop can give us the insights, and I'm looking at ODI here, that constant feedback loop is really going to keep us on the right track, or is a good measurement on whether we're on the right track. So I think, but that kind of operating principle of what we're looking at, what the future of state government and what is our continual focus to be, is something that really was built when Marybel was the secretary, when Michael was the secretary, and of course Keely, with your outstanding leadership when you were the cabinet secretary as well as a finance director, that provided that type of ecosystem for this to continue.
Yeah, you're speaking my language, because I've been through several of these budget cycles in California, and I always get worried about the core operations of government, because there's a lot of things that are not invested in during those times historically. So this conversation, I think, is even more timely given the tight budget situation. You know, what we do in government, what you do in government is inherently complex and politically complex, legally complex. There are a lot of different competing interests often. Marybel, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about some examples, some successes, maybe some failures, and you know, just how important what everything Amy has been just said, you know, what was to how that happened. So,
Well, I'll leave the failures
Okay.
or not so successfuls over here for a minute. But thank you for all of you for being here today. This is a terrific turnout. And again, I'm so pleased to be with my former colleagues and dear friends to talk about things that we're all passionate about. I think that something that Amy and Mike and Keely and I were all involved in that really started us on the modular thinking, end user design, a whole new way of thinking in terms of how we procure technology, how we think about technology, and how we iterate and make sure that the $500 million mistakes are not made any longer in California when it comes to big technology programs that are complex. Yeah. And Keely, you said the complexities are political, they're technological, they're just the government processes, and boy, is that ever true. We all have several bosses when we're in the positions that we all have been in. One, of course, the governor. But then we have the other house, the other part of our government, the legislature. And then we have our jurisdictional committees that we really have to pay attention to. So when you're going about a major program, and then we have Department of Finance that we really have to bow down to. If you're going about a major undertaking, a major procurement, all of those things come into consideration and must. But I think, and I'm going to ask Mike and Amy both to join in because we were partners in this. But when we really reformed, let me use that word, change it if it should be, the IT procurement process, it started with a program that was struggling and had been at HHS, the Child Welfare Program. And in this process, we learned a new way of procuring. We went from the waterfall process to an agile process. We partnered with some wonderfully brilliant people from Code for America and eventually 18F from the federal government. And in that, we really rethought, and we have to continue this all the time, every day, in many processes in government, not just technology, is the end user. Why in the heck are we doing this? And for whom? And why aren't they at the table? Why aren't they at the table helping us design this and come up with the solution and the answers? Because after all, it is for them. It is not for us, the bureaucracy or a bunch of secretaries. It is for the end user, whether that is a child in Los Angeles County that's being bopped around through the system, untracked, and really not being helped, or is it a program at CAL FIRE or at transportation? All of these things, we have to be wise to the fact that it is not a technology. It is a program to assist the end user in whatever they are doing. And that's really where we started. Mike and I was first called by Code for America, and they came and visited, and I called up Secretary Diana Dooley and Mike and said, you guys need to come over here and listen to this, because this is about your program. I'm Secretary of GovOps, but this is your program. Yeah. And please add to that, because I think that was the beginning of us changing some of our thinking in government about how we did IT procurement in particular.
Yeah, I agree. And again, thank you for everyone for being here. This is an amazing turnout. This is really, really fun and a great panel to be part of. You know, the one other piece that I'd say was, and Leanna was talking about this in part of her plan, is modularity.
Absolutely.
And so really moving away from this idea of a large deliverable, and instead a series of modules that you can put together. And why
Skateboard, Amy.
yeah, and why that's important for us is that when we switched on this procurement, we were within weeks of putting the RFP out on the street.
Yeah.
Everybody knew that it was coming.
And what number of
It was
was it?
It was 1,600-page RFP.
And it had been 3, 4 before?
Well, and there's going to be people in here that just aren't surprised by that number. So, and so this is one of those where you switch and you say, okay, we're going to change the way that we do this. And Amy and I had to go up in front of the vendor community. Probably some of you were in that room, and talk about what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I remember telling the community, I said, there's 3 things I know about this procurement that we're about to put out. So we were saying it was about $500 million. It cost me more. We were saying it was going to be 7 years or so, at least 10. And at the end of it, I wasn't going to like what I got. And Leanna, you hit on all of those points when you were talking through your plan. And what I emphasized with the vendor community, because they all started getting upset about it, so that's not your fault. That's a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah.
The state is as much a participant in that as you are. We just need to break that. That can't be the relationship that we have anymore. It just leads to failure. And we can't do that. And we can't do that in 10, 15-year increments. We need to know faster when we need to make course corrections. And quite often, what also, and this is part of Marybel giving the call to me and Diana, is that program needs to be in the room. And this is when you get into a department, program and policy need to be leading. They need to be in there with the IT folks, because it isn't about an IT system, it's about how you're delivering your program. It's about how you're getting your core needs filled, and that has to be a partnership across the department. And it can't be that the policy folks look at it and go, okay, well, I signed off, and now it's your job to deliver this. Like, no, you need to have constant check-ins. There needs to be, is this meeting the needs of program? Is this meeting the needs of the end users? And we need to course correct when it's not. So that, and Amy was the person that I turned to when we started looking at this and said, figure out if we can actually do this, both can we do it technically and can we do it legally? So.
And then we turned to her for...
Well, then you stole her.
Then I stole her. Then she became director of CDT.
Yeah, well, and I love that Amy, who was the former director of CDT, is now the GovOps secretary that oversees, just leadership in state government. And I know you've been doing a lot of work in really, bringing leadership training to across state government leaders. But Mike, I think you make such an important point. The technology is part of the executive's job to really understand and to be a part of the solution. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit? I know, and then I'm going to go ahead and say, as the former finance director, I think how we finance technology in the past has not always been helpful and supportive to getting these modular solutions, these iterative solutions. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges with the way that we finance technology, and just some thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, and I would, and if I may, Keely, I want to build to what both Marybel and Michael had said about the foundation that was laid out, about going to this modularity, about going to this agile approach, and apply to what we are doing currently with the generative AI proof of concept I'm sure many of you have seen. And then from there, what we are continuing to see some of the challenges that really partly, or mostly, due to the way that currently these tech and innovation efforts are being funded.
Right.
So just a little bit of a context, as you heard from both Marybel and Michael, that while we were able to work with program and policy owners to say, hey, how do we look for a creative solution to modularize these efforts still take time. And for those of you that are tracking how the budget proposal process, in the state, it's 18 months process, to talk about what do you need, how much you need, and how do you measure. And keep that in mind, that cycle of length and cycle, trying to match that, then how we're moving these modularity approach with the tech, solutions that we're building. And now fast forward to today with the introduction of Gen AI, that further accelerates how solution could be prototyped and built, right? So the specific example, when this was started, was it 2016? Right? That we were happy if we can reduce this type of project from 5 to 10 years to 3 to 5 or even 1 to 3. Like we were happy with that. And that already would be an incremental step. But with the explosion of Gen AI, now that if you're looking at how these technology can be built and could be prototyped, we're looking at matter of months. And the fun thing is, and I call it this fun thing, I know my staff at the table right there is like, Amy, it was not fun for us to do all of the proof of concept. But the fun thing is, we were able to test it out. In this case now, nearly 10 solutions in a matter of 6 months. Wow. And a lot of it, of course, our program department, I'm looking at Adam here being one of those program department owns 2, right, of the 5 proof of concept. But each of the 2 concepts has 2 innovators, so that's 4. So we've been working with, I just realized my math really is bad. We have 5 proof of concept, each has 2 innovators, so there's 10 innovators building out their solution, and every single one of them in the past 6 months have proven out value and benefits that we were seeking. With that kind of, I know, that deserves a round of applause. Now, as much as we give a lot of credit to the technology, for sure, generative AI have that kind of capability, a lot of credit to our innovators that's been partnering with us, not to mention they're only doing this for $1 because we're prototyping. But to Mike's point, the program owner was at the table every single day, right? They've been working with CDT on the technical infrastructure and the security. They've been working with ODI on the product management side of it. They've been working with our Department of HR on the labor engagement, which Keely, you alluded to, because we cannot do this without our workforce and labor being engaged. And of course, Department of General Services is the one that crafted the procurement option that both Marybel and Michael laid it out, call it the request for innovative idea, we call it RFI Square. With all of those pieces come together, we have proven out in the last 6 months, 10 of those innovative solutions are coming to fruition. Now it's the challenge. Where do we go from there? We have 6 months proven out. Are we going to wait for an 18-month cycle? Right? And that is, unfortunately, often the challenge we're facing. And everybody get into this momentum. Yes, this prototype is great, and even there's company coming back to I can prototype way less than 6 months, right? 3 months, 4 months, they can prove it out. But what do you do from there? How do you get the approval? How do you get the stakeholder? So I think this is one of the conversation we're having to really lay out this challenge and talking to our stakeholders, talking to our legislative partner, talking to our vendor community, talking to our community-based organization to figure out, do we have a way to be more creatively funding these initiatives, not based on a very rigid 18 months budget cycle?
No, thank you. Something I've seen in my history in government is there are these cycles, and how do you hold the steady focus to keep building on what you've been building for the last several years? So that seems like a challenge we all want to help support. But Mike, can you talk a little bit about the public-private government industry collaborations and how those can really help to support project success and program success for Californians?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I was alluding to in the prior answers, that traditionally that there hasn't really been a partnership. It's been, the state's contracting, we have vendors, the vendors have their way of doing things. There's not a lot of interaction between the two as you're doing these projects, especially when you're doing it in a waterfall manner where it's just kind of you get the deliverable, you figure it out. It's not what you want. You change order. Lots of change orders. You continue down that process. Part of what we were trying to break, and when I was saying that dysfunctional relationship, that's what I'm alluding to, is this sort of environment where that's the norm. Mm-hmm. And instead, what we were looking for, and what I know Amy's continuing to do, and Leanna, is partners. That there's a real working partnership, there's a real shared goal between the people in the private sector that we need to help do the work in the public sector. And we can't possibly do everything that we need to do in the public sector. We just sometimes just don't have the talent, we don't have the number of people, we don't have the latest technologies necessarily. And so this is bringing that in and helping the public sector really think through different ideas. And this is part of, I know the three of us, actually all four of us, have been getting questions about CCGI today as we came in here. And that's really one of the core tenets around why we decided to launch this, is to really foster that relationship between the public and private sectors and really create a space where there can be collaboration, where it's not around the contract, it's not around change orders, it's really about inspiration and how things can be done differently and how relationships can be developed. And so the thought behind that is really a couple of different ways that can be done. One can be just bringing vendors in around a particular topic area and saying, what are you doing in this area that's interesting, cool, that's going to be inspirational for state staff and rethinking how the state does business. Important in that, and this is why I think it's really important that it's us that are leading this effort, is that, well, we really want the CIOs and the IT folks to be engaged. Program and policy needs to be in as well. And so we're going to be making big pushes to bring leadership of departments and agencies into this space to really be inspired about how to do their work differently and to provide that air cover that everybody needs and the resources to do that and to effectuate that change. And I've seen this personally, the inspirational side of it. We used to, when I was undersecretary, we would go to a vendor's research space, and I'd throw a group of people into a van, and we'd drive down to San Jose. And
just say that van was not something that you think that it would be safe to ride in.
There were bullet holes in it and stuff.
There were bullet holes on the van.
It was fine. It was a state van, so. We can talk about general services about that.
Wait, that's under me.
Yeah,
now.
why that thing was still on the road.
All right, never mind.
But so I would, however many people I could fit into that van, and a couple other people would show up. And so it was both, the state staff had a great opportunity across the HHS departments to really just, 3 hours in a van, you're going to talk. And so they had a great opportunity to just kind of build relationship in that space. But then also when we got to the research facility, there was no agenda. There isn't a contract that we're trying to get. There wasn't a sale being done. It was just, what interesting work are you doing that you'd like to show us? And most of it, I didn't think there was any real practical application for the state. Some of it there was, but it always was a really kind of like, wow, that's cool. And it's honestly the space where I reassessed risk. It's where the first time we were there, this company asked us, they said, say we do 10 of these projects, how many have to hit for it to be a success? And there wasn't a single person on my team that said less than 7. Most were probably in the 8 or 9 range, and there were some at 10. And this company said 1. 2 maybe, and if we hit 4, we didn't think big enough. Now, I'm not saying the public sector should be thinking that way, but when you're thinking you have to hit 8, 9, 10 out of 10, you can't innovate. There is no way you can take risks, and so there's not an environment where you can do anything different and where you can rethink how government does business. And so that really, for me, was from that point forward, really was kind of one of those markers for me of my job is to make sure that I'm providing the leadership and the space for people to take those risks where they can feel safe. Now, don't be reckless, right? Learn from things when they don't turn out the way you think they should. But push the bounds. Talk about ideas that you normally wouldn't even bring up. And try to think about how you do things differently. And so that's kind of what we're hoping for in this space that we're creating, is that type of an engagement with the private sector. And then the other track can be something that's more along the RFI squared types of examples that Amy was bringing up, which is where there's a particular topic area, bring in a series of vendors who can say, here's how I would address that problem. And I think one of the things that the state really needs to hone is its ability to articulate its problems. Mm-hmm. The state needs to own the problem statement. Right. You do not have to own how to solve that. Right. That's where you need to go out to the vendor community, and this is where that work that Amy and Leanna are doing is so important, is really pushing that idea of take the problem, put it out to the vendor community, let them figure out what the right approach is, and then try out several of those, and then decide what it is you want to do, and you're going to find that you're much more successful, and that you're more likely to get a solution that you probably never thought of, and probably a technology that's more up to date than when you would have otherwise. I can guarantee it's more up to date than what we would have gotten with a 1,600-page RFP. So
I want to underscore just one thing that Mike said. The problem statement. This is so critical. And how many times have we seen that not done properly, and only to start down a 5, 6, 7-year track that's off track from the beginning. So even before you put pen to paper in terms of really thinking through what that problem is, make sure you have really dug deep into your own resources and what you have to solve that problem. Many times old terminology, but business reengineering of the situation you're trying to solve. We did this a few times when I was at GovOps, and there would be 16, 17 steps that would be taken or necessary in a process. When we really did some business reengineering, it was down to 3 or 4. When indeed, if the department or agency had sat down to do their problem statement, they would have had all 16 steps in that problem statement, or in that solution, if you will, or the problem they're trying to solve. So it's critical, as Mike just said, and I just can't underscore that enough, that you really have to, and it's hard sometimes to look deep into ourselves and figure out what it is about what we need to do that isn't always, you're looking at yourself and saying, that's kind of ugly. Well, get in and figure out why it is ugly, and then figure out what the problem is and the statement is. And then you can reach out and get some of the kinds of innovative ideas flowing from the vendor community.
Well, I love what both of you just said, and I think, it just underscores that we're not talking about just digitizing processes and program delivery from 30 years ago. We are talking about really rethinking the way in which we deliver services, and that's not just about technology, but technology enables us to think about how to deliver the services differently. And I was thinking back to some of Leanna's comments about future-proofing. It's really necessary given all of the change that's happened in our world. Well, I just recently heard an interview by former Governor Jerry Brown, and he said something that just made me chuckle, because he said, well, the future is very uncertain, but that's very exciting. So I would love to hear from each of you what you're excited about in this space of government innovation.
Well, I heard something from Liana that, and from my job, my work at the CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission, and then since then some nonprofit work that I'm doing when it comes to wildfires and wildfire mitigation. And wow, I did not know that story about the AI generating Cal Fire to put out a fire before anyone had called 911. That kind of things that we will all learn in our future, like tomorrow, like today, are so exciting when you think of how that can improve healthcare delivery and agricultural products, and I mean, my God, putting out wildfires. I mean, maybe we won't have another paradise, God help us, you know? So those kinds of things it give me goosebumps. It's so exciting to know that we can accelerate projects, and the thinking and the proof of product in 6 months or 2 months. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. I mean, when I think back to how we struggle in so many ways, that's the future, and that's exciting. And we have to protect ourselves too with it. I know that.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
So I think the move towards delivery. So as we're explaining what it is that we're trying to do, you know, so often it's been kind of it's project or IT focused, or then it's digital services, and that becomes just kind of a, you know, there's a certain group of people that are doing something in a certain way, and it's just around the project. And what I like is that more and more I'm hearing people talk about overall delivery for people. And so what is it you're doing this in purpose of? And it also then encapsulates all of the other parts of government and the private sector that need to come together to do delivery. That's not just about the particular project, but really about the services that you're providing, the way in which you're providing those, who you're providing those to, and really articulating those interactions and those needs, and figuring out how to move towards those, rather than just, you know, I need a project that's going to do child welfare services, without really understanding what exactly that is, what the who the end users are, what sorts of people I need to bring together, and what sorts of parties. And I do think that then is a whole of government approach. So this is, you then do need to, if you're going to do it in any sort of a reasonable time frame, you do need to start thinking through how you're budgeting for these things, how you're doing approvals, who's involved in those sorts of things. And so I think it's a really exciting time, and I think it's really, from my perspective, broadens this audience out. And so, you know, when Bill's saying what does next year look like, you know, double the number of people in the room and bring in a bunch of directors and chief deputies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Amy, what about you?
I'll probably summarize in 3 things. One is, you know, what both Marybel and Michael talked about is really the state starts shifting from a project mindset to a product mindset. And that is the whole approach. And I'm looking at Office of Data Innovation and Director Jeffrey Marino, who you're going to hear later on, going to talk about that. Because once you take how you measure what is success, you know, I wouldn't say replace, but in addition to, you know, whether it's on schedule, whether it's on budget, whether it's on scope, but in addition to that, what outcome is it beneficial? Is it, you know, is it something what the users are waiting for or looking for or expecting? And then that constant feedback loop, that product mindset is what GovOp agency, along with our department, are really working with the state entity to move towards. And also, I wanted to also formally introduce our brand new Undersecretary, Sarah Soder-Taylor, in the audience, who has been a leading voice for the governor for the objective key results, OKR. It's another way of speaking to, you know, the measurement is different. It's focusing the objective you were trying to achieve and what are the milestones to see how you're doing against that. So that is a mindset that I'm very excited that we're continuing to move towards. In doing that, in doing so, it draws or opens up the opportunity for streamlining, looking at how we can do things differently. And Marybel used the word, perhaps it's an old term, business reengineering. I love that term because you need to constantly reevaluate yourself. Do I just somehow inadvertently add 5 steps to, 8 steps already? Or should I looking at whether the 8th step that we had before could be reduced to 3? And that type of self-evaluation, it is hard. It is very hard because it's about looking in the mirror, like, ooh, I had reason to add the extra 5 step, but is it really necessary? Right. And do I have the courage to reduce the 8th step down to 3? That is a hard thing to do. But actually, when we're in the budget situation, I see that as opportunity to look for areas where you can streamline, where you can find efficiency, where you can actually do things smarter and not, make it drawn out unnecessarily. So that's the second thing that I'm actually excited about. The third thing, and the taking it out much broader, for all of you or choosing to be here, is you have made a personal decision in how do you invest into yourself as well as the entities you represent to constantly join these conversations. Because one thing that we're going to do more is, as you heard, partnership, momentum, bringing people along. That is not doable if we don't have a constant feedback loop, communication, and a platform to discuss it. At the end of the day, everything that we're trying to achieve, we talked about whether it's, government transformation, technology being the enabler of that, and et cetera, people, not only at the center of who you serve, but people, it's also at the center of delivery, right? Workforce development is a huge focus of ours. And that's why we get to work with CalHHS and the labor agency, not only looking at the state workforce, but the state of California workforce. And in this very competitive environment that we enter into, how do we ensure tech and innovation workforce in California continue to be leading the nation so that when companies are looking at talents, they should look at Californian being their top talent pool. So we have to partner up with the industry, and like we are already doing so, there are many of the conversation in place to how do we make sure that the partnership going beyond a contractual relationship, going beyond what do we need to enter into building a solution, but what are the content, what are the trainings, what are the conversation that platforms such as can be stood up so that individual, whether you are on the delivery side or you're on the receiving side, how do we come together to raise that literacy about what do we need to do in order to utilize all of these advanced technology that are out there?
So many good points, Amy. I love your emphasis on that really important feedback loop of data and information about how policies are going. And I think coming off the 21, 22, 23 fiscal years, there were a lot of new things tried. And not all of them are going to have the same level of results. And it's so important to move out of conjecture and just feelings and into actual data and information about how things are working. But thank you all. I think we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. Bill's going to help us out there.
First, questions. Yeah, I just want to raise your hand.
So we stunned everybody up
in the back.
Good. Okay, I knew I was going to get my exercise this morning.
I love that idea of a tight budget being a forcing function to look for faster ways to innovation. So just curious to hear expanded thoughts on what you think that could actually look like, especially, I'm interested in the craziest ideas you have.
Do you really want me to go for the craziest ideas? No, my staff is waving me. Don't get yourself in trouble, Amy. I would say that ideas what we have is, we talked about, and this is probably coming back to the notion of modularity and being agile about things. one thing about technology, I'm speaking to a room of folks that are, expert in this, is that in some way, as it's good to have a big vision and good objective, but be very intentional to really just invest what's in front of you right now, test it out, see if it works. So give yourself that room to pivot and adjust. And I think in the time that when we know the budget situation is tight, I would recommend, and this is something we're talking to the departments about, don't come with hundreds of millions of dollars as their de facto, baseline to say this is what we need to invest. Talk to our partners in the industry, talk to other departments that have been doing this. Can you leverage things? Can you expand what is available so that you just add a little bit to it? Can you do something in a much, much smaller scope, test it out, the skateboard notion? Once it's proven out, you can go further so that you can, not only reduce the cost associated to it, but mainly the risk associated to it. So when people have to make tough decisions on what they have already invested, of course, everybody wanted to invest in something that are, least risk, but probably high return. And so as a business entity or as an industry helping with the program and policymaker deciding or making their choices, definitely channel that kind of thinking behind it so we can scope what you need to deliver, at this moment in time more surgically. So that's one, recommendation I would give.
Okay, next question. Here we go.
I was fascinated by the discussion about sort of being very honest about the problem statements. And as speaking as an economist, I always think about, okay, so you have a problem, you have an objective, but you also have constraints, which sometimes are budgets, sometimes are security, sometimes are other things. Are there any good examples of places where that trade-off is sort of like well articulated and it's led to a better product?
Well, we talked about what we did in terms of HHS. There are probably many of them, but it's more to me the process that you go through. I mean, some of you know of Kaizen, that kind of process that Toyota developed, 40, 50 years ago. But it's really gets to the fact of what is it that we're trying to fix here. Really, what is our problem? And you better talk to the people who are actually working and doing the job, because they often, the manager, the supervisor, the manager, whomever, up the chain of command, think differently perhaps about the problem than the people that are on the front line.
Right.
You've got to talk to the people that are actually front line, that are the end user or right there with the public, trying to serve the public. And what do you know? They actually may know what's wrong because they have to deal with it every day. So it's really the process by which you go through to get to the problem statement, and then make sure you've tested it well before you really get into how do we fix it.
I think that process is so critical. And it's one of the things that's, I think, a real missing link. But it's happening, but we need to do more of it across government, because sometimes it needs to inform a change in one of those constraints, which is the law that created it.
Absolutely.
That may have been very well intended, but it's not actually meeting the needs of the people or the goals that was
like you said a little bit
intended.
ago, maybe well intended 10, 15, 20
Yeah.
years ago. But go back and really look into, why do you even think you have a problem?
Right.
And talk to the people that actually are functioning in that space.
Right. That's why all of this work that, Amy, you're leading right now is so important, because it's not just about better services, it's also about informing better policy as well.
Better
Absolutely.
policy. And maybe just last quick tidbit, go to do a search on the Gen AI proof of concept in the state of California. The 5 proof of concept that are out there have outstanding problem statement, and it's a well balance of defining, what are the programs are looking for, but also very honest about what environment they should be doing the proof of concept in. Like for example, you heard from Leanna that there needs to be in a sandbox, and the data that we use needs to be readily available, public already. Now, is that going to achieve everything that the program wants to do at the get-go? No. But we did list some of those boundaries, if you would, upfront, clear and simple, and so that the innovators, when they come in, they understand what is expected of them. And through a very, very active engagement throughout the 6-month period, the innovators were also honest with us, say, hey, some of these boundaries may be too constrained. Can we do something else? And that prompted a lot of further creative dialogue to solve the problem. And that, I think, is the essence why you started off with a problem statement with the honesty of what would come with that, but then laser focus on what objective you're trying to achieve. That's why we were very, very happy seeing the results of those proof of concepts.
I think Amy's hit on one of the key points is that communication, which is just absent in the traditional way that big projects have been done. There just hasn't been that active communication and ability to pivot. And so, this is what's so key about the way that things are moving, is that there is that active dialogue, and so those sorts of constraints are going to come up. And if you have the right partnership, you can raise those and then decide where are we going to go from there.
One more question over here.
Good morning. Thank you for Dr. Wilkening for the Vision 2026, and you all taking a time to talk, look back and look ahead. Much appreciated. I have a question for the 3 founders of the California Center for Government Innovation, and wondering if you can connect some dots for us, the vendor partners, how we can contribute for this forward-looking new foundation that you just started. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is what I was laying out, kind of what it is, generally what we're looking to have it to be. We're going to be coming out in the next month or so with some real opportunities for people to engage. So right now I've laid out what the framework looks like and those 2 different paths that we're looking at. And then we're working with the state staff right now to figure out where do we start in that journey. And because for all of us, I don't think any of us were in government for less than 20 years. We really just, this is giving back to the state. We were really invested in the success of people in the state and making sure that they have the resources they need to accomplish really difficult jobs. And so we're doing this in partnership with the state and want to make sure that the first things that we come out with are really in furtherance of that objective. So stay tuned, it's coming.
Is there another question over here?
Well, and I think Amy, Secretary Tong, touched on it a little bit that piqued my interest in something over my career that I've really wanted to see advance from project to product. And I'd hope you'd share a little insight of where you envision that, because that's, to me, where we need to drive innovation and develop.
Yeah, happy to. Again, I think there's also a great article that was shared out, so was it a few months back by the original founder of Cove America, Jen Polka, that she was doing a testimony at the federal Congress about this conversation about switching or shifting from a project mindset to a product mindset. And there's this chart that is kind of synced in my brain right now. And again, I'm looking at the folks that have read that article. ODI, CDT have all read it, and everybody in GovOp. That in the idea of a project, you go up and you have an investment up front and you peak, and somehow magically the cost would drop. And I know Keely painfully recognized that cost never drops. It just goes up and stays up and then stays up and stays up, right? And the issue with that is when you think about project, people think you spend a lot of the time up front to write down what you want, which is resulted in the 1,600-page requirements. And somehow magically, if you just invest enough money out there, the solution will magically happen that meets all those 1,600 requirement. And then after that is met, it's done. You go into a nice M&M mode. You don't need to touch it again, and good luck. Hasn't been proven out at all, right? Has not been proven out in any of the 20, 30, I started very young, years of a state career in looking at that. So the product mindset is, first of all, because you're coming from, let's not measure how many requirements you get. Let's not measure this artificial timeline that you've set out. Let's not measure this artificial cost projection that you have made, like somehow you have a way of looking at 5 years cost later. Let's focus on what do you need right now, and then do it in a small increment. So it's more of a little bump along the way, but you set out front, I want to build a Golden Gate Bridge, but not necessarily, not in one bite. I might want to build it, I might want to come back and paint it, and I might have to paint it again, but don't give the illusion somehow that the entirety of building this entire solution is going to happen in the magical peak, and then everything else will be hunky-dory after that. And I think just the honesty of realizing it's a flaw of how we've been thinking services can be delivered, it's a fundamental recognition of how we need to shift the mindset. Having that said, just by telling people shift, that's not going to happen automatically. That's why we have invested the entire office called Office of Data Innovation, specifically focusing on not only providing training, but working with the department to demonstrate what that thinking needs to look like. And third, I was not a plug, and you guys didn't ask me to do this. Seeing is believing, and having a platform such as nonprofit that just to have come together would create that platform to test out these thinking, in a safe environment. And I think at the end of the day, people will believe what they see. People will believe in the results. Talk is, not that important, right? So I think that is what we need to do to how do you shift from a project mindset through action, through demonstration, through just prototyping and rolling up your sleeve and just do it. And the state is ready for that.
That's good. And I'll say I was on that van, and we had seatbelts, Mike.
We have seatbelts, that's right.
Okay, one more question I think we have time for. Okay.
Thank you for that, Amy. I can't agree more. Action. We want action. We don't want to just talk.
So Keely, I think this might be for you, but I'm curious, you touched on the misalignment of procurement and dollars flowing to match the pace. Can you share or shed any light on what's being done to help flow money more quickly or accessibly, or are we going to be always in an 18-month cycle, or do you envision a way to provide the financing on a quicker timetable?
Well, I'm not in government anymore, so I can't speak to that. But I think that I certainly recognize many years ago that there was a disconnect. And in order to get into this more iterative, less risk, reducing risk, we need to really evaluate how to provide more flexibility in between these check-ins that we have, that's the way in which our democracy works, that the legislature appropriates the money, the administration then implements, but we do need to figure out much more agile, iterative, using all the words that we want for program delivery. The financing needs to meet that is my
critical.
Yeah.
We tried with the Child Welfare Project by building in some language into the budget that allowed flexibility so that you could augment based on where you were with going back to finance and finance having the control over the release of the funds. That's not the whole solution. That's kind of a stopgap measure, and there does need to be a broader change to how how this is all budgeted.
It was innovative at the time, though.
Yeah, it was at the time.
Yeah, and this is also an important conversation with the legislative branch of government because I think they're very used to having a very defined widget for, that they're funding. And this is something different, and it requires more flexibility, more understanding that we don't have all of the solutions right now, and we're not going to be able to tell you exactly how we're going to spend every dollar because we need to go and figure that out. But we need that space. And so that's really like a continual conversation and education with the policymakers.
Absolutely. That also goes to one of the things we mentioned earlier. I think you said it, Mike, that it's not industry's fault. It's sort of, I used to say when we did the effort to reform IT procurement and move from the waterfall concept to the more agile, I used to say to some of the vendor community, we're mirrors unto each other. We have a project, they deliver, it's not quite right, there's a mistake, the legislature sees that, they ratchet down with some statute change, and then the agency has to develop the regulation and the guidelines, and we just keep ratcheting. And in that ratcheting up, we constrained ourselves. Government did, the vendor community did, and we lost the ability to be flexible and innovative. And with a more iterative, modulating kind of process, if you will, those mistakes are caught sooner, and we can resolve and collaborate and communicate with each other. And so then I think bringing the legislature along is extremely important, so they don't slap us down where we get back into the rigidness that sucks the innovation out of all of us. And we have to partner. The politics are extremely important, as well as getting the problem right. It all is part of the fabric that we weave.
The good news is the legislature hates the process too.
Yeah, they do. They do. They can't. But let's not let them tell us what process it should be.
Yeah, the administration needs to lead it.
Then it's a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore what a big deal the governor's leadership has been, Amy's leadership, and those, from the top down saying, no, go and try new things, make mistakes. That has not always been there. And just in terms of government being a very risk-averse place, and that has a lot to do with some of the lack of progress, I think.
Absolutely. I think we've all mentioned, giving cover. Those folks that are in the room who are in leadership positions, you have to be the risk taker, and you have to give the cover, if you will, to your teams that are the innovators and that can come up with the ideas. Let them flourish. But you have to be willing to go to finance, the governor's office, the legislature, testify, and lay out the reasoning.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.